If we talk about the Second World War, and we mention the capture of thousands of people because of their nationality and ideology, to later be executed in cold blood for being incorrigible, what is the first thing that comes to mind? You are probably thinking of the Nazi German regime led by Adolf Hitler and its infamous attempt at ethnic cleansing under the Third Reich. However, not all the massacres in this war were perpetrated by the Nazis, and in general, a lot was done to hide them, or at least to keep the responsibility of the country that carried them out for decades a secret. An example of this was the Katyn Massacre, which occurred between April and May 1940 at the hands of a nation that, at that time, was an ally of Germany. We refer to the Soviet Union, guilty of the mass murder of at least 22,000 people, and which only revealed and acknowledged its guilt for this crime in 1990 after 45 years of holding Germany responsible for these events. But what exactly happened in Katyn Forest? What led the Soviets to systematically shoot so many people? And what impact did this have when the Soviet Union switched sides and became part of the Allies? You'll find the answers to all these questions in the next few minutes. So make yourself comfortable and join us to learn more about one of the greatest Soviet massacres of World War II. Are you ready? Then prepare to travel back in time. On August 23, 1939, 9 days before the start of World War II, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression treaty between the two nations in Moscow. It was also known as the German-Soviet Pact, or the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which refers to the surnames of the foreign ministers of those countries. This was followed by the German-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Demarcation, and later by Stalin's request to join the Axis in 1940. One of the most direct consequences of this was the designation of Poland as a zone of influence, to be distributed among the signatory countries. Thus, Germany made sure that it could invade that territory without any fear of Soviet intervention. The Red Army did not condemn the Nazi outpost. Moreover, after the German invasion on September 1, 1939, the Soviets did the same, an event that started the Second World War. Consequently, while the Germans began a massacre of Jews and Poles in the western half of Poland, the Red Army captured thousands of Poles in the eastern region, both military and civil, placing them in various prison camps within the Soviet Union. However, this punishment would not be enough. A few months later, the head of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, abbreviated NKVD and forerunner of the KGB, Commissioner Lavrentiy Beria personally presented Stalin a plan to exterminate Poles. This was quickly approved by the leader of the Soviet Union. So much so that on March 5, 1940, Beria sent a top-secret letter to his subordinates, ordering that the supreme punishment be applied, the death penalty by shooting to Polish prisoners, calling them permanent and incorrigible enemies of Soviet power. Of course, the NKVD troops did not take long to comply with the orders. During the spring of that year, just a month after the letter was mailed, the Katyn Massacre occurred. This name comes from the homonymous forest in which the events took place, although the homicides perpetrated simultaneously in other nearby places are also taken into account, such as the Kalinin and Kharkov prisons, among others. It is estimated that the total victims of the massacre were at least 22,000 Polish citizens. About 8,000 of them were military prisoners of war. Another 6,000 were police officers, and the rest were civilians. The latter, members of the Polish intelligentsia, such as teachers, artists, researchers, historians, politicians, lawyers, engineers, scientists, writers, and journalists, all accused of being saboteurs, spies, or counter-revolutionaries, opponents of the Soviet regime. Specifically, of the approximately 22,000 prisoners, 7,305 came from camps in what is now Belarus and Ukraine, 6,311 from Ostashkov, 3,820 from Starobelsk, and 4,421 from Kozielsk. The latter were those executed in Katyn, and only 448 were amnestied, saving themselves from extermination. The transfer to the forest was carried out in trucks, with 10 prisoners per vehicle. One by one, handcuffed, they were placed in front of a huge pit, then were shot to the head and fell directly into their own grave. This meant, in just a few months, the extermination of the entire Polish elite and great intellectual values. There are even those who claim that there are still undiscovered pits. Interestingly, the executions were carried out with German-made Walter pistols delivered to the Red Army during the invasion of Poland. The Walters, coincidentally, were the statutory weapon of the Gestapo, making it clear that the Soviets, from the beginning, took all possible precautions to hide their responsibility, as if they knew what was coming. The first alarm was probably raised when the Polish general, Władysław Anders, began to form an army after the Soviet Union changed sides in the conflict. When requesting that the approximately 15,000 military prisoners of war captured by the Soviets be transferred to his command, the answer was that nothing was known about them because they had escaped to Manchuria in December 1941. Nothing more was known about it until the 13th, April 1943, when the Germans themselves publicly announced the discovery of several mass graves with thousands of bodies of Polish officers and civilians. In fact, the Nazis reported that according to their records, the bodies belonged to prisoners who had been under the power of the Soviet Union. Faced with these accusations, and during the decades that followed, the Soviets flatly denied any kind of responsibility and claimed that the real culprits had been the Germans. They also refused to cooperate in the investigations. Meanwhile, even a delegation from the International Red Cross corroborated, during those years, the veracity of what the Germans were saying. And it did so even under the alleged pressure of the British and American governments not to investigate the subject too much. After all, it was not in the interest of the Western Allies to antagonize the Soviet Union. As President Roosevelt said in a telegram to Churchill in June 1943, "Winning the war is the primary objective for all of us. This unity is necessary." Of course, the situation was exploited by Joseph Goebbels through propaganda to divide the Allies and deepen popular anti-Bolshevik sentiment. He would even brag about it in his personal journal. After the conflict ended, in 1952, the United States formed a special committee to study what was already known as the Katyn Massacre. The investigation ultimately determined Soviet responsibility. However, it was not very clear about the US pressure to hide the fact years before. The Soviets, for their part, went on with their active denial of the massacre until 1988, when Moscow began to hint that events might have been different from their version. Finally, in 1990, the Soviet Politburo approved the publication of the documents relating to the Katyn Massacre, accepting its obvious responsibility, although without officially acknowledging it. And surprisingly, in 2005, the Russian Military Prosecutor's Office claimed that the massacre was not a genocide, but rather a prescribed military crime. The Polish people, even today, continue to demand justice. And now, we ask you, do you think that Russia should officially acknowledge its responsibility? Leave us your answer below. And don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you for joining us, and until the next video.